Hey everybody, John here, Old Hickory Forge. Today we're talking anvils, so stick with me. Alright, so in this video we're going to go over anvil anatomy, different types of anvils, what to look for when you buy and such. The anvil market, as of now, is completely insane in my opinion. People are paying $7, $8 a pound for beat up garbage. So basically we're just going to go over what you should look for, what to avoid, things like that. So right here what we got, just a plain old Peter Wright anvil. This is actually a farrier pattern Peter's Wright, so it's a little bit different than your common Peter Wrights. But Peter Wright and Mousehole are the two most common brands you're going to run across in your anvil search most likely, because they imported anvils from the colonies from England from the 1600s all the way up until the early 1900s. You know, American anvil manufacturers didn't really break out until the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, so there's hundreds of thousands of more of these in America than there is American anvils. So every so often you'll run across a guy who's trying to ask the moon for a Peter Wright or Mousehole anvil on the grounds that they're rare. That's simply not true. Don't buy it. But anyway, what we got here, just plain old Peter Wright anvil. This is the face, this is the body, this is the waist, these are the feet, this is the heel, this is the horn. You know, I could go over how you use every different piece of the anvil and such, but right now we're just going to talk about markings. So as you see, we got Peter Wright, patent England. That puts this anvil post-1910. After 1910, everything that left England had to have the word England on it somewhere, or maybe it was just anvil. So if you got a Peter Wright or a Mousehole that says England on it, it's post-1910. Before that, they just said Peter Wright patent, and even way back before that, they just said Peter Wright. But anyway, these are marked using what's called the English hundredweight system. So if you look at it with the horn facing to the right, it's my left because I'm looking at the camera, but for you it's the right. You'll see three numbers. Right here we got a 0, a 3, and an 18. The 0 is the first number, and it's what's called a hundredweight. It means 118 pounds. Middle one is quarter hundreds, that's 28 pounds. Over here is common pounds, so 18. So whatever, 28 times 3 plus 18, that's how you calculate your anvil weight. If you had like a 1 or 2 over here, you'd say like, you know, 2 times 112 or something like that. But we got a 0, so we don't have to worry about it here. Anyway, that's a Peter Wright. They're good anvils. They're solid anvils. They're very usable. There's nothing wrong with them. One thing you do have to watch out for is over time, because these bodies are made of soft wrought iron, they'll get what's called a sway back in the face. Basically, we're above the sweet spot. It's dipped down and saddled out. If you ask me, a sway backed anvil is trash and it's worth nothing because the surface ain't flat. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. So some people still try to ask $5, $6 a pound. They're full of crap. Don't buy it. But the way these are constructed, body's wrought iron with a hardened steel work face. The hardened steel face also runs across the top of the horn as well. So they generally got pretty good rebound. You know, they got a little bit of ring to them. Ring doesn't actually mean anything. It's just, you know, it just sounds pretty. So ring does not necessarily, or at all for that matter, reflect upon the quality of an anvil. And I'm about to show you that here in a minute. So that's a Peter Wright. Let's talk about the next one. So what we got here is a Mousehole. Again, one of the biggest brands you're going to run across. These were made in Sheffield, England from the 1600s all the way up until the 1930s, so they're very common. Characteristic of a Mousehole, you'll usually see kind of a fatter waist and a more stout heel than you will on a Peter Wright. But the tail of a Peter Wright, if there's no markings visible, you'll see those steps on the feet. Mousehole anvils don't have those, but these are constructed in the same manner. Wrought iron body, hard steel work face. You can actually see the seam of the forge weld running across this one. It's in pretty good shape. But, you know, like I said, it's not sway backed. The corners are relative. They're there. They're not great, but they're there. You could round them off into fuller ring edges if you wanted to. Fun fact, when you see horns blunted like this, that's intentional. Whenever these came from the factory, they were still sharp. And what smiths would do is they would actually take a hammer and blunt the end of the horn because you didn't want something pointy sticking out at crotch level when you're running around your shop not paying attention. It could really ruin your day. So, yeah. Like I said, soft wrought iron body, hard steel work face. Good anvils. Nothing in the world wrong with them. So, this here's a Fisher anvil. It's 200 pounds. Fisher Norris was a domestic anvil manufacturer here in the United States. I don't know what years they operated or where they were located or anything like that, but these are excellent anvils. Now, that being said, here how it doesn't ring. It's still got great rebound, better rebound than that Peter Wright or Mousehole. But the reason it doesn't ring is because the bodies of these are a very high quality cast iron versus the forged wrought iron. You got a really thick, hard tool steel work face. Tool steel work face runs across the cutting plate and the horn as well. So, like I said before, ring doesn't actually mean anything. It's just, you know, it's just indicative of an English anvil. But what to look for, as you can see with this Fisher, the edges are very, very crisp and clean. The face is perfectly flat. A lot of times you'll see these edges chipped out, rolled over, things like that. The anvil is still usable at that point, but it makes it certainly worth less if you ask me. The edges are arguably the most useful part of the anvil. So, you know, just know what you're looking at and don't be afraid to call somebody out on their bull crap if they're like, oh, I got a such and such Peter Wright, one of a kind that's worth $10,000, and you look at it, it's just a regular Peter Wright. Tell the guy he's full of shit. So, this here's a Hay-Budden anvil, also 200 pounds, same as the Fisher. These were made in Brooklyn, New York, and they were the premier domestic anvil manufacturer. They were the first anvil company to really be able to compete with the big companies over in England. So, now there's lots of different kinds of Hay-Buddens out there. Some of the latest ones were actually cast steel. You don't run across those that often. And this one in particular has a wrought iron foot, and there's a forge weld at the waist, and this entire top half is forged crucible steel. Now, most of the Hay-Buddens you're going to run across, I'd probably say 9 out of 10, are just going to be your standard wrought iron with the hardened steel work face. They're going to say Hay-Budden Brooklyn on them. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with this one. It's just solid steel from the waist up. As you can see, there's no sway in the face. Edges are still crisp and clean. This horn is actually pointed, so whoever had this decided not to point it for whatever reason. And these are generally also marked. You can't see right here because it's really dirty, but the weight marking will be right here, and the serial number will be right here. On a Trenton, it'll be over here, which is similar to a Hay-Budden. But again, great anvil. It's got a good bit of ring to it with this solid steel base, or not base, top half, and this really long, thin heel really lets it resonate a lot. Personally, I love that sound, but your neighbors may not like it too much. So, but anyway, Hay-Budden, great anvils. If you run across one and you can get a good deal on it, by all means buy it, but you will see them with sway in the face sometimes, and like I said before, to me that makes it worth nothing. What's that worth to you? That's up to you, but to me it's worth nothing. So, what we got here is what's called a Columbian anvil. These were made by Columbia Tool and Hardware up in Columbus, Ohio. I don't remember the exact years they operated, but they were a domestic anvil manufacturer. And these were some of the earliest examples of cast steel anvils. Cast steel anvils are the way most modern anvils are made. They're one solid piece of steel, the face is hardened. And the great thing about these is they provide maximum efficiency in discharging the energy of the blow to your work, because there's one solid piece. You don't have the soft wrought iron or cast iron body absorbing it. So they have that unmistakable upside down triangle with the C in it. I'll probably zoom in on it later and show it to you. Fun fact about this particular Columbian, as you can see right there, there's that little circle with like the F and the B in it. Between 1925 and 1927, Columbian Tool and Hardware actually outsourced the manufacturing of their anvils to the Fagersta foundry in Sweden. So anything with that FB on it was actually made in Sweden. And these are generally perceived to be higher quality and are a little more sought after, but either way they're great anvils. But they ring very, very loud because that's one solid piece of steel. But excellent rebound. They're very hard, very tough. You rarely see beat up Columbians. So if you run across a Columbian anvil, you can get it for $3 a pound or less and it's in good shape, by all means buy it. So here's just an example of the stark difference of some of the anvils you're going to run across. So here's our Mousehole we talked about earlier. This one's in pretty good shape. You know, the face is still perfectly flat and smooth. There's no pitting, anything like that. But the edges are rounded over pretty severely. You can see the hardy hole's been, you know, very well used. Horn is blunted. So, you know, this anvil, in my opinion, is worth considerably less than something like this Columbian here. These edges, aside from that little chip right there, these are the factory edges. They're still nice and sharp. These would actually have to be chamfered a little bit before you could use it, but the chamfers on the hardy hole are still sharp, Pritchell hole's still sharp, horn's got a nice point on it, which comes in handy more often than you'd think. There's zero sway. I don't have a sway back anvil to show you because I've never bought one because they're trash, but face is perfectly flat, perfectly smooth. edges are sharp. That's what you're looking for the most. So here's just a close-up of some of the markings we were talking about on an English anvil. We got Peter Wright, patent, England. There's solid wrought in a circle right there. You can't really see it, but it's there. First number is 112 pounds times whatever this number is, so 0, obviously. Third one's 28 pounds, so 28 times 3, 8, 16, 24, plus 60, 84, plus 18, 102. So this anvil was made at 102 pounds. Over time, they do lose weight, just, you know, from being repaired or chips coming off and stuff like that. I haven't actually weighed this one, but it's probably, you know, 100 pounds, 101 pounds, something like that. But generally, you can go off whatever this says. And here's a close-up of what I was talking about with the steps on the feet of a Peter Wright. This is the tail of a Peter Wright. If there's nothing else on this anvil, and you see these, you can be pretty confident that it's a Peter Wright. So, a little more info about the face. This is the hardy hole. This is the Pritchell hole. This particular anvil has 2. The hardy hole is used for holding tooling. You saw making that in my recent stump anvil video. The Pritchell holes were originally used for making horseshoe nails, and a Pritchell was a type of punch used for punching holes in horseshoes. But mostly they're used for, you know, punching through something so you can actually get through it, or doing bends in small stock, things like that. This particular anvil doesn't have a cutting plate because it's a farrier pattern Peter Wright. If you look over on this Columbian, you can see we have a cutting plate, also known as the bench. This is slightly softer than the rest of the face, and it's meant to be used for anything that could potentially damage the face of the anvil. So chiseling, cutting, if you have to go through something, do it here. Another fun fact about Columbians, oftentimes you'll see this casting line here on them. And a lot of people will say, oh, if it has a casting line, it's cast iron, blah, 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 avoid it. Check and make sure it's not a Columbian before you say that, because Columbians are great anvils. Also, you'll see you have handling holes in this Peter Wright. These would, the workers would put a big piece of bar stock through this and use it to hold the anvil and manipulate it as they forged it. Columbians don't have those, and that's another thing people say, oh, no handling holes, it's trash. You know, a lot of times that's simply not true. So keep an eye out for Columbians, they're great anvils. So this is another example of a cast steel anvil. This is an Old World Anvils, model 110, so it's 260 pounds. I forget where they're made. It's somewhere in Oregon, or maybe Washington, something like that. Maybe in the Midwest, I don't know. Either way, they're great anvils, but there's a reason most modern anvils are cast or forged tool steel. Just recently, I got in an argument with a guy who was asking like $6 a pound for a beat-up Arm & Hammer anvil, and he was trying to say that they're simply better than newer anvils. That's bullcrap. It's fake news. It's not true. Here, there's no forge-welded workface that could potentially fail. There's no soft wrought iron body absorbing the energy from your work. Not to say wrought iron anvils aren't good. They are, but cast steel or forged tool steel, one solid piece of steel will always be more structurally sound than one piece of steel forge welded to another piece of steel. Example, this stump anvil I made the other day. Had I made this out of one piece of steel, rather than forge welding a workface to it, I could have used solid tool steel. It would have probably been a better stump anvil, but I wanted to challenge myself, so that's why I made it this way. So every so often you'll run across people who try to say that older anvils are better than new ones. That's not true. Don't listen to them. Don't buy their crap. So, good way to mount an anvil. If you're on a wooden base like I am, you can't see too good because of the chain. This would be a huge pain to take off, so I'm not going to move it. But all we have is just a piece of angle iron with a hole drilled in it, and we got a lag bolt sitting into the stump, and that's pinning down the edge of the anvil. Anvil's fully serviceable. It ain't going nowhere. And so that's my main shop anvil. So we're gonna end this video talking about some alternatives to traditional anvils. Here, what we got is just a piece of railroad track. It's been shaped out into an anvil-esque form. These are commonly referred to as ASOs, or anvil-shaped objects. This was actually a gift from a mentor back when I was a teenager, and it was my first anvil for a long time. But as you can see, it actually broke along the waist right here, and I took it to a machine shop and had it welded back together. A lot of people will say, you know, get you a piece of railroad track to start out on, blah, 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 blah. Honestly, they're not that great. Like, you know, it's got a little bit of rebound to it, but this is just a work-hardened high-carbon steel surface, basically. So the other option, if you're starting out, and a lot of people are probably going to hate me for saying this, but Harbor Freight anvils, I don't have one to show you, but you can buy little cast iron Harbor Freight anvils. They're 55 pounds. You can get them for $50, $60. And in my opinion, they're better than a piece of railroad track. The reason is you actually have a hardy hole. You actually have a wider face to work with. This is not flat, it's slightly crowned. Harbor Freight work anvils are flat. You have a more serviceable horn, but and also not only that, but the increased mass is going to provide better transfer of energy to your work. Mass will beat hardness every time. Is a cast iron anvil softer than this? Yes. Is there about 3 or 4 times as much mass reflecting energy back into your work? Yes. So I used a Harbor Freight anvil for over a year, and a lot of really beautiful stuff came off it. So, you know, if you're just a beginner, you're looking to get started, buy a Harbor Freight anvil. If you don't got $500 or $600 to drop, you know, on a big Fisher or a big Hay-Budden or a big double horn like mine. So, you know, what if you get into blacksmithing and you decide you hate it? You know, you're out $50 versus being out several hundred or even thousands of dollars depending on what you bought. But I mean, railroad track is fully serviceable for small work, but if I had to choose between this and a Harbor Freight anvil for general blacksmithing purposes, I will take the Harbor Freight anvil. So, anyway, that's just my 2 cents when it comes to anvils. I love anvils, so I was more than happy to talk about them when one of my subscribers requested. So if you have any other questions, feel free to comment, feel free to message me, and like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.